On December 16th, 2016, I sat next to my best friend as he laid in a hospital bed. Keith wasn't responsive at that point, except for two eyebrows that would move up and down as conversation was being made about him. The disease he was battling, a desmoplastic small round cell tumor. As Keith would put it, the longer the name of the cancer, the worse it was. The most noteworthy thing about the disease is that it had a survival rate of 15% after 5 years. Keith had been fighting for 7.5. My father, an oncologist, would say that Keith had a particularly challenging disease. Within only a few hours of arriving, my hand was on his leg as he was struggling to take breaths of air. I held on to him as he died. Keith's life and ultimate passing has led me on a journey of trying to discern what is the purpose of pain, how it interacts with us, and what causes people to treat others with empathy, sympathy, or even apathy. Keith's death was a cruel punctuation to an otherwise difficult life. I'd known him for over a decade, and during that time, I saw him subjected to some of the most cruel and ruthless bullying and harassment. After he was diagnosed, mass messages from the students at the high school we attended started getting circulated, such as, "Keith has cancer, I just found out," sent out in almost a pre-Facebook era as an attempt to garner likes and attention and not a sincere show of support. The middle school we attended even put together a support group comprised of some of the most vicious bullies from the time. It seemed as if everyone, overnight, had changed their tune about how they were going to interact with Keith. Prior to Keith's diagnosis, he was treated in a remarkably apathetic manner. And I don't mean apathy in the sense that people didn't believe he existed. I mean in the sense that they believed he could not share with them a common pain. And when you believe that someone can't experience pain, it leads one to treat them with cruelty and indifference. As Keith's closest friend and confidant, we spoke frequently, if not daily, about how he was treated compared to pre- and post-diagnosis. I was quick to react callously to what I perceived as the verisimilitude of caring. I was bitter, I was angry, and I held that view for the entirety of his battle, and even past his death. It seemed that this group of people went from treating him with apathy to sympathy. Sympathy is absolutely worthless. It's recognizing that pain exists, but it's doing nothing about it. It's cowardice. And to have felt sorry for Keith's situation was indeed sympathetic, but to actually take the pain he was experiencing and embrace it and work to alleviate some of his suffering, that's empathy. Empathy is one of those frequently misused words. Generally speaking, when most people say empathy, they're trying to say sympathy. Empathy is about the embrace of pain. It is about making it just as much as yours as it is theirs. And when you do that, you have this feeling and compulsion to want to solve and resolve the pain as best you can. Disease does this particularly well, especially cancer. Cancer is an omnipotent disease. It does not care about your stature. It does not care about your circumstances. Cancer does not care. It can affect all of us. And most of us have probably had interaction with the disease, either directly or by seeing a loved one battle with it. And so the pain that it creates, that becomes a highway for us to be able to connect with each other. Our empathy moves quicker than it normally does. Disease does this remarkably well. But as with any axiom, there's always exceptions to the rule. Take someone with lung cancer. At first, you may be thinking, treating them in a very empathetic manner. But then if you find out that they are or were a smoker, that empathy might shift into conditional sympathy, and it may even slide further. This is where sympathy mutates into apathy. Apathy is an us versus them type mentality. It requires us to shut down our pain receptors, to not believe that anyone could experience something like we do. And perhaps it's because they look different, or they sound different, or they hail from another region. Maybe it's because they have a different complexion or set of beliefs. But whatever it is, when we shut down and stop feeling other people's capacity for pain, we've not only dehumanized them, but we've become grossly indifferent. How is it that we have these common pains, such as disease and loss, but we can differentiate between who is worthy of our emotions and our care and our support and who is not? It's because we decide to be apathetic with a select few. The point being is that it is remarkably easy to hurt someone if you believe they can't feel pain. So it's with that we have created a spectrum. On this end, we have apathy, the denial of pain of someone else. In the middle, we have sympathy, in which we acknowledge the pain, but that's it. Then we have empathy. When we acknowledge the pain, we embrace it as our own, and it compels us to work to solve the pain. I call this the empathetic lens. And what I'd like to do is, using that context, to bring up a couple ideas and ask you to reflect and think about your most visceral reaction in the context of the empathetic lens. Do you perceive the situation through empathy, sympathy, or apathy? So let's go. Brain cancer, Alzheimer's, homelessness, refugee, debt, loss of a child. If you're anything like me, you probably had a wide range of reactions. Items like disease and loss would evoke the strongest of empathetic reactions. Others may have just conjured sympathy, and some even apathy. Sheer empathy wasn't enough to fix Keith. His cancer was unstoppable. But what empathy allowed us to do was to rally around him and work to solve some of the other sufferings that accompanied the disease. After a surgery, when he lost mobility of his hands, people empathized and worked with him to provide him with dignity and ease in navigating the day-to-day activities. When he was in the hospital, people visited him to try to relieve the pain of boredom and loneliness. And in his final hours, people held on to him to try to relieve the fear of not knowing what came next. I believe it is incredibly worthwhile that when we are confronted with the pain of others, we do our best to examine how we are perceiving their pain. Are we taking that apathetic approach, that sympathetic approach, or that empathetic approach? Disease is obvious in terms of being open to their pain and embracing it. Other situations, the day-to-day ones, it's a bit more nebulous and a bit more challenging. My friend Keith experienced a spectrum of apathy, sympathy, and empathy, even in his abbreviated lifetime. But I can definitively say he would have had a much higher quality of life, a much more caring and compassionate life, if people would have treated him with empathy for all pains, and not just cancer. If people can shift their perspectives and go from treating someone with apathy to empathy in the face of the most obvious pains, we can certainly do it for the less obvious ones. If we can examine the pain in which people are going through on a regular basis in a meaningful way, if we can embrace their pain and look to solve it by making it our own, having a collective ownership over it, we can make a much better lifetime for all of us, and even those with an abbreviated life. Thank you.